Hello, everybody, and welcome to my virtual coffee morning. I hope you've got your coffee ready. Mine's a skinny soya latte, as always. And this is our weekly roundup where I invite a guest from the world of property, and we have a little bit of a coffee and a chit chat around a particular theme. Today's theme is about property development. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to put to our special guest, Evan Maindonald, on property development, and the challenges or opportunities that we're all going to have in 2021, then put them in the chat and we'll start dealing with some of those things as we go through. So really great to, sorry about that, just get my chat window up so that I can see what it is that you're saying. Oh dear me. Could you do me a favor and get my, I think I just messed it up. Okay, it's live, so we get a few teething problems here and there. Now, who have I got today? I've got none other than Evan Maindonald. Evan Maindonald is a good friend of mine. He's a very, very accomplished property developer, and he has quite an interesting Instagram presence, actually. Now, in the world of social influencers, I have 3,000 followers on Instagram. Evan, I just checked this morning, Evan has 13.7 thousand followers on Instagram, but his dog Brian has 33.9 thousand followers on Instagram. Evan, good morning. What's the secret?
Well, you'll have to ask Brian, actually. Brian is clearly more of an Instagram expert than me, but I think it comes down to being cute and looking fuzzy. That's probably,
that's the number one tip.
And I'm not.
I guess you would say
not fuzzy enough.
I guess he would say succeeding on Instagram is rough.
Oh, yeah, it's rough. It's very, very rough, especially in these rough times. Yeah, but
Evan, listen.
I'm trying to be a dog.
Listen, I know you very well, but many of my viewers may not. Give people a little bit of an essence to what Evan is all about.
So I regard myself as an entrepreneur, and so I think, and in particular a property entrepreneur, but with a very strong interest in technology. So I was born in New Zealand, and my first degree was a degree in computer science, and I've been interested in computers and technology since I was really young. In fact, my dad, who's probably one of the first people ever to start using the internet, he was using the internet, believe it or not, in the 70s, before the World Wide Web or any of that stuff came along. He bought a computer home when I was 12, and I started.
Which one?
Programming it. It was a VIC-20.
The thing is, we've talked so much. I didn't know this about you, Evan. I mean, I did a computer science degree. My dad bought me a computer when I was 11 years old. It was a Sinclair ZX80.
All right, yeah, I used to play with those. So I got the VIC-20 came along after the ZX81.
Yeah.
And I remember programming the ZX81. That was the one with the flat keyboard where you had to press the keys down, didn't have a proper keyboard on. And then, the VIC-20 came along and it was, had a proper keyboard. So it was like, oh, a real computer. But I remember all of those things. I wrote a Space Invaders game, actually. I programmed a Space Invaders game for the VIC-20.
Aha.
So probably in my if I'd been in the right part of the world, I probably would have been a tech entrepreneur. I was. So
that was assembly language or basic?
I think it must have been basic, maybe a bit of assembly language. I can't remember it, to be honest. I do remember the first programming language I learned was basic. I taught that myself from a book, and then I went on to learn lots of other programming languages.
So how do you think that's helped you become in the world of development? I mean, the whole thing about IT background, if you like.
It certainly helps me understand how we can use technology to help build a more efficient business. So I always built the business around a strong technology base, and I think we run the company very efficiently as a result. But I think also it's interesting. Property is one of those industries which has so far been relatively unaffected by the internet and the tech revolution. And I strongly believe that's about to change. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this leads really well into what our key focuses are going to be as a company, what Melt Properties' key focus is going to be for the coming 12 months. I just got off a call actually with my top team, and one of the things I said to them is there are three pillars really that I see as being important to our company and what it does going into 2021. One of them is something we do already, something we're very strong with, which is enhancement of value. So we look for sites where there's a strong base case. So we know that if we acquire it, it works on the basis of the planning consent or whatever it is that it's got. But we look for significant potential for enhancement. So in essence, that's a one-way bet. You know, if we can get the enhancement we're after, then there's a lot of upside. But the worst case is we know we're going to make some money, and we can get out of it, and we'll make a reasonable return on investment. So we like those kind of projects, and actually.
Sorry, just to summarize, these are projects with consent for some kind of development on the site, and your skill, your knack, is bettering that. Basically, you know that you can go back to the planners and better improve the scheme.
Exactly that. And actually, the thread that runs through that is design, right? So we use design and we focus on the innovative use of design, particularly contemporary design, to bring enhancement to schemes.
Okay,
so,
what do you mean?
Let's come back to that point because actually, you know, the really important one is you know, where I was going with that was, you know, where I think the industry is going. The other two things that are really important are sustainability, and that what's happening in the world of sustainability is that there are a number of technologies that are starting to come to maturity and or reach production economies of scale, which means that it's possible to implement sustainability solutions in an economically viable way. Those technologies are things like battery technology, which is being driven by companies like Tesla, who are innovating really strongly in electric storage, by the maturity of solar panels, and particularly thermal solar panels that can be used not just to generate electricity, but which run more efficiently when you cool them with water, and you can use the water that is heated in that way to go into the heating system in the house, or the water heating system in the house. And the third one is ground source heating. So if you combine those three technologies, you can capture electricity, you can store electricity, and you can use that electricity to power the heating system for the house. And in essence, what you do is you use the ground as a huge heat sink. So you draw heat out of it in winter, and you put heat into it in summer. So you cool the house in summer, heat the house in winter. You can build developments that are fully off-grid and carbon offsetting, not just carbon neutral. That's exciting for a whole host of reasons. It's because there's a huge amount of money being poured into sustainability, and that money will increase. But it's also important from a buyer point of view, because people now are looking at properties and saying, actually, if I'm going to buy a new property, I want something that will still be fit for purpose in 10 years' time. There's a huge buyer demand for sustainable properties. And if that stuff can be delivered economically, in other words, in a way that it doesn't make it significantly more expensive than a normal house, and it's much more cost effective to run, then it becomes a no-brainer. And we're at that tipping point where the cost of those technologies are getting to a point where if you can integrate technology in a way so as to deliver solutions that enable that for buyers, then you're going to have a real USP. So
that is very powerful. Let me just ask you, what about flats then? Are you putting these sort of the ground source heat and all of that sort of stuff in some kind of communal heating system for blocks of flats? Or
yeah, we are. But and let me come back to that point. But I think the third one that's really important is modular, because again, that's another technology that's starting to reach the point where it's becoming economically sustainable. And now in certain parts of the country, in London in particular, modular is starting to become cheaper to deliver than traditional construction. So you take all of that and you can start to see that actually you're going to be able to design developments off-site and put technologies together which are going to have a significant impact on the way that buildings work. And you can start to see how technology is going to impact on property development. And so those two things, along with value enhancement, are going to be the key pillars of the support our company going forward in the next probably 4 or 5 years. And you will see a significant shift in our focus towards those things as we go into 2021. So we can come back to whichever one of those you want to talk about first.
It's very innovative, and that is the way that new build is going. And I mean, many viewers to this channel will know that I am a big fan of permitted development, converting old buildings. And of course, it's much harder to retrofit a lot of these technologies in the envelope of an existing building. So the question then arises, is a PD, if you PD convert an office block into multiple flats, in 20 years' time, is that going to be the equivalent of having bought a diesel car?
It might be the equivalent of having bought a diesel car and tried to convert it to electric, because it's much harder to retrofit something than it is to just get something that was designed to work that way in the first place. Actually, I drive an electric car. It's the first electric car I've had, and it's been a bit of a revelation in terms of how the whole thing works. But the fundamental thing about electric car design is that the batteries are built into the floor plate. So because they're heavy and they keep the center of gravity of the car low, and so you can't really just take a petrol car and make it work that way. It's just not designed to work that way. And I think it's one of the problems with PD schemes. They're not, you are repurposing existing buildings, yes, but could you put ground source heating into one of those schemes? It'd be bloody difficult, because you've got to get a piling rig into the building and put a bunch of holes in the ground. You can't lift up an existing building, put stuff underneath it. And so you are limited in what you can do. And in a world where gas boilers are not going to be able to be used from 2023 onwards, what are developers going to be doing? How are they going to be delivering solutions that don't use gas boiler technology? Ground source and air source are really the only two possibilities, and air source has its limitations. Ground source, I think, is the thing probably that will become predominant as a heating system.
I think as entrepreneurs, we've always got to kind of keep an eye on the future and try to project what could happen or what's likely to happen, trends 10, 20 years time. But I really wonder whether the rental market, the private rented sector in the future, is going to be dominated by sort of build to rent type of schemes of apartments, which are completely free in terms of utilities. The tenant pays a rent and there is no utility bill because it's all generated for free. And that would be quite hard to compete against if it's just an old house or an old flat competing against that sort of proposition in the rental market. Do you see it going that way, and how soon?
Absolutely. And that technology has the potential to revolutionize the build to rent sector, but also the new build sector. I mean, think about the proposition that you could buy a house and you have no heating bills. Mm-hmm. Which house are you going to buy? And are you going to be prepared to pay more for a house where you have no heating bills? And on top of which, people are increasingly concerned about climate change. If you're concerned about climate change, you might just pay a premium only to live in a place where you know that you're not polluting, where you're not contributing towards global warming. So I think something I've just noticed in the chat, somebody asked about the ROI on this stuff, and I think that's where the innovation is. Actually, that's where the financial innovation is. It's taken us a long time to get our heads around it. We've actually just put ground source heating into a 19-unit development that we're doing in Gloucester. One of the ways in which we've covered the cost of doing that is by something called the commercial RHI, Renewable Heating Incentive, and that is a government scheme that essentially provides grants to cover the cost of communal ground source heating systems. So the deal is that you have to put a ground array in, and they have to serve multiple properties. So you asked earlier on about flats. Mm-hmm. We are going to power the flats there with ground source, power them, I say, heat them with ground source heating, and it will be shared between the flats, and any costs of maintaining the infrastructure will be covered by the service charge on the flats. So, but it will be much less expensive for people to run. It will be even less expensive if we had put in solar panels and batteries as well. And we're currently looking at ways to do that. In fact, something that's really interesting is OVO, the electricity company. They have got some grant money from the government, and they're looking to deploy that into schemes effectively pay for kit, as far as I can ascertain, to essentially help advance the government's green agenda. So, as money flows out of the government coffers for this stuff, it will create opportunity. And I think the key is working out how to apply this stuff and make it work financially. And we've done the same, actually. So we're doing a big mixed-use project in Kennington. It's an apart hotel development. And that's being let to a commercial tenant. What we're doing on that one is we're basically saying to the tenant, we'll implement this technology, we'll deliver you some savings. It's going to save you 150 grand a year. We add that to the rent. The tenant has a really strong covenant. We can capitalize that. That's worth 2 or 3 million quid. And so we use that money to pay for the implementation of the technology. So that's financial engineering. And I think it varies from scheme to scheme. It's bespoke. But you have to understand how to stick the technologies together. You have to understand, how you can make the most of the grants and, I guess the savings that they deliver. And then you need to work out how to be able to capitalize that. That's really the basis of it. And we've done that differently. You have to do that differently on a residential scheme to how you would do it on a commercial scheme. But on buy to rent, the proposition could be that you can get premium rents because people don't have any utility bills.
That's a good point. I mean, going back to what you said on modular, have you done a modular scheme yet?
We haven't built one, but we will be building one potentially starting next year. So if we get our planning consent through on the apart hotel development in Kennington, so we should have a decision on that in January or February, and we should be positive. We might have to go to appeal. We hope we won't have to, but if we get that, then we'll be building that out in modular, and that's a 145 room apart hotel, about 20,000 square feet of offices, 8 residential units, about 20,000 square feet of basement space. So on that one, it's really interesting, actually. It will probably take us, 6 to 9 months to build the basement and the first floor podium. And then the modular stuff can go up in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So your build program is 6 to 9 months traditional construction, and then probably a month to finish it off. It's just super quick.
So does it actually save you money, or is it just saving you time once you're out of ground? That getting to watertight shell. Does it just save you time there?
That is literally the $1 million question. And that question on this project is worth some millions of dollars. And the answer is I don't know, because the cost of modular technology is coming down all the time, because as producers ramp up volume, it's the old mass production thing. The more you produce, the less it costs. And I think the modular industry is starting to mature, and there's some very competitive modular stuff now coming out of China. There's a company called CIMC who's is delivering stuff at a very cost-effective manner. The issue with getting stuff from China, though, is long lead time. It's got to be shipped, because obviously you're not going to get this stuff on a plane. And so if there's a cock-up with the order, you're going to be sitting there for 6 months waiting for a new module to come on. That obviously isn't going to work. And so in Europe, you really want to be dealing with suppliers that are close to you. And so probably people like Elements Europe or Polcom in Poland, or Caledonian. Those are some of the key modular suppliers in Europe. But it's working out which one fits your project. And actually, we work quite closely with a company called Studio Agno, who are an architect who are a specialist in modular construction. Essentially, they have a set of a program that will take a building shell and just work out how to fit a bunch of modular units in it, and then they'll actually work out the most cost-effective way to get those by looking at how the suppliers work. They've essentially built a system to supply this stuff and work it into projects. But it's fascinating stuff, because once you've done those groundworks, you're saving yourself 6 months, and that 6 months, time is money. It means you can bring your profit forward, but it also means that you're not sitting on the finance costs for that length of time. And there's a sense in which it also reduces risk too, because you get more consistency with the delivery. Sorry.
Yes. No, that's an absolute key point. The financing costs really come down. It's not so much I think the total cost to build something traditionally versus modular, when you work it out, is actually pretty similar. but the time saving and the financing costs is where you would drastically benefit from.
Well, you say that, and so you asked about costs, and I think the point is that modular costs are coming down, and so I expect by the time we deliver this project, it's likely that modular will be the same price or possibly even cheaper than traditional. There's a joint venture, actually, or not a joint venture, it's a company that's been set up. I don't know if you've heard of a company called Top Hat, funded by Goldman Sachs. They've put something like £80 million into it. That is all about delivering modular for residential. They're delivering modular in the home counties at £160 to £180 a square foot. That's competitive with traditional build. And if you can build it a lot faster, then it starts to become a no-brainer. So, with companies like that starting to gain momentum, you can see that could potentially revolutionize the residential development sector. In commercial, I think with the Apart Hotel in Kennington, we got a QS to cost up traditional build, and they were coming out at about £260 a square foot. We got it costed up in modular, it was £240 a square foot, so it was cheaper. But what I don't know is the traditional build up looked expensive to me, more to us, and so we're still going through the analysis. And I think actually ultimately we probably could deliver it a bit cheaper in traditional, but it might be $220 as opposed to $240. But the point is that there isn't a lot in it, and when you take the financing costs into account, and also the quality, because when you build it in traditional, you are going to get some variation in the quality of the finish, maybe the room sizes. If we're on a contract and we've got to deliver a certain spec to a commercial tenant, then we know that if we deliver it in modular, then we're going to get exactly what we ask for.
Exactly.
They're all going to be the same. It's going to be in a factory.
It's done in a factory, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the best will, when you're doing traditional construction, yes, we have building inspectors come in and you have your site foreman and your own QSs and all of that, but they're not there 24/7. They don't know if every section of wall has got insulation and the brick ties have been done properly and all the detail. Who is actually watching in every second? And you have that assurance when it's built in a factory by machines that it's just done with a bit of precision.
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. And what's exciting is actually, with a Apart Hotel development, they will deliver. I mean, the modular supplier will deliver not just the modules, but they'll deliver a fully fitted hotel. So literally, they'll put the TV in, they'll put the bed in, they'll put the pillows in, they'll put the desk in the room, and they just wrap all this stuff up in delivery so it doesn't move around. You literally, you build the thing, you open the door, unwrap the stuff, and it's ready to go. There's no fit out.
But are they tying up the towels and putting them on the bed in the shape of an elephant? I mean,
they will do that if you want them to. The only thing they won't do is provide guests.
That's the thing. Listen, I think a lot of the projects I do are a bit more short term because they're PD. You're in and out in a very small timescale relatively, and you're financed and all of that sort of stuff. So the level of crystal ball gazing that I have to do is not that far into the future. But with the kind of stuff you have got on your plate at the moment, you got to have a handle on what the economy and the market and the prices and everything's going to be often 2-3 years or 4 years or more down the road. So I'm very fascinated on your crystal ball and your outlook and your viewpoint for the next few years. I mean, what do you think your estimations of GDVs today will actually be like in 3 or 4 years' time?
So I think you need to look at the market on a sector by sector basis to some extent. There's what's happening in commercial versus what's happening in residential, and then what's happening in different subsectors of the commercial marketplace. I think what's going on is very interesting. I think what we've seen this year is a turbulent commercial marketplace, because clearly the economy's been significantly impacted by COVID, and there's been a lot of uncertainty around asset values. And so anyone who has had a commercial property or a commercial deal that's let and it wasn't tied up, and I's dotted and T's crossed before COVID, has taken a hit. There's been a an impact on lease values because of people's views about the certainty of what's going to happen going forward, there's an argument that that means that it's a good time to buy. So, there are, in certain sectors, I think there are commercial assets that are probably undervalued because people are maybe a little bit pessimistic about the timing for recovery. Mm-hmm. The residential market's completely different, and there's a big difference between what's happening in London and outside London. We're in a phase where I think London is, the forecasts for London, and I think this is probably fairly accurate, London is not seen as performing as aggressively as the Shires. London always seems to outperform, actually, historically, in my experience. So it wouldn't surprise me if London actually ends up performing more strongly than we've anticipated. And quite honestly, we were all a bit focused on the COVID world, but the COVID world's going to be over soon. We've got vaccines coming. 6-9 months, we are going to be maybe not quite back to normal because COVID has had a big impact on the way that things work. But we are going to be back to I think a position where at least we're very close to what we might all regard as normal again. We can go out, we can see each other. But I think what COVID has done is it's changed people's habits. We all do online shopping now because we have to. We all do Zoom calls now because we have to, because we can't meet one another. It has caused a huge shift in people's habits, a shift that was already underway. It's accelerated that shift, and it's going to have a huge impact on office and retail. It already has. The question is, what happens post-COVID? How does that pick up again? And how does that, how much of that change in people's habits will become permanent? But there's no doubt that it's accelerated the decline of the high street and the need for us to change the way in which we approach our town centres. And I believe it will result in more localism. In other words, rather than people coming into co-working centres in London, more of a rise of co-working centres in regional cities and companies recognising that actually it's okay for people to work from home. And in fact, maybe they're more productive and maybe they're happier because their lifestyle is better. That has already led to a significant impact on the residential market, particularly for large country houses. So that I think I saw an article the other day saying that rents for large country houses have risen by 70%. 70%. That's just unheard of. But that's got to have a corresponding impact on demand for city centre properties. So we have a 15-bed HMO in Kennington. It's actually in the property that we're going to be developing. We saw demand for that just drop off a cliff during COVID. We had to drop the rents by 30% to get to a point where people were prepared to rent again. I mean, that's the impact that COVID has had on the residential market. But on the other hand,
in London,
yeah. But we've also got a place that I am at the moment, Danby Lodge. It's a 7-bed grade 2 listed former hunting lodge. We've had our best year ever in terms of holiday lets. So we've probably doubled what we did last year. So that, I think that's really a great illustration of the difference of the impact that's happened in the residential market. But I think that will swing back a little bit. As we come back into normalcy, people will start to come back into cities. I think it'll just even itself out a little bit.
So I guess that's Brian in the background doing an Instagram live or something, is it?
That is actually Brian's little brother, Arthur. But yeah, he's got a bit of a woof on. Sorry about that.
No, you're right. I mean, we've noticed that ourselves. Do a lot of London, obviously, particularly with studios, HMO, 1-bedroom flat type of market. If people aren't going into central London to work at the moment, then they don't really need to be in town. But I do see that as a temporary trend, which should spring back. The question is how fast it springs back after COVID is over. You mentioned the high street and all of that, and of course we're all shopping online and doing all that sort of stuff. I was very excited last week when the government dropped this consultation paper on what they're proposing for Class E. To summarize, basically a whole bunch of commercial properties have been put in one usage class now. Shops, restaurants, banks, building sites, doctors, surgeries, dentists, kids' creches, and all of that. And the consultation paper is proposing that, in essence, you can take any of those buildings and convert them to residential use. It doesn't matter whether they're in a conservation area or not. It's subject to minimum space standards of 37 square meters per flat, and every habitable room needs to have natural light. But and you can't make any external alterations to the envelope of the building without planning permission. But apart from that, the proposal is it's pretty much light touch within that. And that is massive as a change, as an enabler, particularly for smaller developers who can suddenly buy a property and plan to do something with certainty that no person in the council is going to stick their beak in, and it's really going to help build. I think they've also said that PD so far has delivered 72,000 homes, which is quite significant in getting to the government's 300,000 a year target. What's your take? Do you think it's a monumental change, a little bit of or storm in a teacup, or what?
I think it is a significant change. I mean, as with all of these things, the devil is in the detail. And what has happened in the past with PD is that councils have managed to thwart, the full extent of PD rights by finding other ways to work around people being able to use them. And so I guess that if there's a fly in the ointment, it could be that. But you can see that it can create a significant opportunity on, let's say you've got a scheme that's maybe, I don't know, 40% office, 60% resi, and the resi element is more valuable. You implement that scheme, you can convert the office to resi straight away. So that creates a lot of leverage for developers when they're looking at existing consents. And it creates opportunity for developers to maybe take an existing consent and do something with it that otherwise they might have got a lot of resistance to.
Yes.
So I think with planning, a lot of it can be leverage. It can be about leverage. And if the council know that you're able to do something without their consent anyway, then it puts them in a much weaker position if they are trying to resist you doing that. And that really is often what the argument is about, is that leverage. Can they actually stop you? And a lot of it is driven by local pressure groups who have a particular agenda, but the agenda is not about housing. The government, all the noises coming out of the government support delivery of more housing, but in essence, the mission of most planning authorities is to get in the way of development. I sound like I'm being negative about planners.
No, you're not.
It's just the fact is that local pressure from residents pushes people in a particular direction, and these are elected representatives of the people. That's what they're there to do, and that's what happens.
Listen, you're not negative. I mean, when you put in a planning application, it goes to the development control department. It never goes to the development enablement department. Have you ever submitted a planning application to XYZ Council Development Enablement Office? No.
No, doesn't exist.
It's the planning control department, development control department.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is one of the things that I learned when I first started doing development, which came home to me very quickly, is that as soon as you become a developer in the council's eyes, in the planning authority's eyes, they treat you completely differently to the way that they treat a householder. So they are much more sympathetic to individuals. When you become a business, they suddenly become a lot harder. And particularly, it's a particular problem with Labour councils. They have an attitude towards people who make money. They think that people shouldn't be allowed to make money, fundamentally. I mean, it's what socialism is about, right? Well, maybe not quite. Perhaps I'm simplifying, but the point is, Tory councils do tend to understand this stuff a lot better. And at the end of the day,
I'm so glad you said that, because I've been saying that I've cut my teeth in development in Jeremy Corbyn's constituency. So need I say more?
Right. Listen, the weird thing about it is these people are our friends, right? Because that's what keeps property prices high. If there's no development, there's less properties around.
Yes,
That keeps property prices up. That just helps people that own property already. I think that's the real irony of it. You restrict development, it just pushes land prices up. That's economics. And so it's actually counterproductive, because it means that houses become less affordable. And I think, and the answer isn't just give stuff away, because that doesn't work either. It's been proven that socialism and communism don't work. I don't know why we keep trying it, but anyway. And capitalism may not be perfect, but it's the best of the options we have out there.
But it creates affordability. It creates a mix of dwellings, because in the conversation we've had today, we can already see why new build homes, which take into account all the latest technology, are going to attract a premium, and probably more so than the traditional new build, because a lot of new build flats and new build houses, they attract a premium in terms of the first person to buy it, but then it becomes second hand. But this is like a way of preserving that new build premium for the next buyer and the next buyer on, because it's technologically more advanced. And then you've got PD dwellings, which probably won't be, but it creates a mix of price points for different people.
But look, I think about what's coming along, right? There was an announcement a couple of weeks ago or last week I think it was, that there won't be any new gas boilers from 2023 onwards. In a month's time, we're going to be in 2021. That's 2 years down the road. Anyone that's doing a development today, it's going to take them a year, 2 years to deliver it. This stuff, gas boilers will be out of date by then. It's going to come along and hit us very quickly.
Oh yeah, I have to interrupt. We've had a comment, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but the pledge to ban gas boilers from new builds by 2023 has been withdrawn.
Right.
So
okay. All right. Well, there you go. You could be right, but look, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's
coming at some point.
It's coming in at 2025 if it has been withdrawn. The point is, though, that even that is ambitious, and it's a massive change.
Yeah, of course it is.
And I don't think it really even matters. Look, we have just built. We've just finished the show home at our development in Gloucester. That is powered by ground source heating. On the first day that we released it, we had someone who came around, viewed it, said, "I want to buy that." And they're buying it because they love the sustainability that's built into it. Well, that's one of the reasons. I mean, it's a beautiful house, but the fact is, people will pay a premium and will prefer stuff or housing stock that has that sustainability built into it. And one of the reasons is that they're looking forward and saying, actually, in 5 years' time, will anyone want to buy a house with a gas boiler in? And the answer is no, because once people realize this stuff works and get their heads around it, they're going to want to buy stuff that's sustainable and is future-proofed.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you?
No, absolutely. But I think in any case, a lot of developers, when we put flats together, we make them all electric simply because the hassle that the gas connections people put us through. It's easier.
But the thing is that ground source can give you the best of both worlds. If you can, because electricity is a lot more expensive. If you can deliver electrically powered heating for the same cost as gas, then it becomes a no-brainer.
Yes. No, I get that. I get that fully, and I think all developers should have an eye on the new advances in technology, and especially in terms of the cost benefit. Because the costs are always coming down, and it's about when is it the right point in terms of the cost, and the benefit, when is it the right point for your development in your area, because depending on property prices in your particular area, it will or will not be viable, but as time goes on, in more areas it will just be viable.
But I think that whole financial engineering thing is important to it. There are people building social housing in Wales, and that is probably about the lowest end of the market you can get to in terms of value. And they're making these. I'm not being rude. It's just a fact.
No, I know.
And they're making these houses fully. They're making them energy neutral and carbon positive by using those combinations of technologies. So if you can do it in those types of properties, you can do it anywhere. I think the economic case is driven by how do you fund it.
But are they doing it because it's heavily subsidized? Is it a genuine sort of like a private sector project where there's genuine
No.
profit on costs?
No.
Because that Welsh thing is probably subsidized somewhere, isn't it?
No. Well, there's a level, but not to the degree that you're suggesting. I think
Okay.
it's not. If you're suggesting it's being subsidised heavily by grants, no, that's not the case. Or the grants that can't be accessed by somebody who's doing a normal residential development, that's not the case. Look at the commercial RHI. But look, think about it this way: if you can deliver something that doesn't cost anything to run, then maybe somebody will pay a small service charge to cover the cost of what it will cover what it would otherwise cost for maybe a 20-year period, and then you can capitalize that. So that's one way of looking at it. I think the problem is it's bespoke and it varies from development to development. So what you have to do is you have to start looking at, you have to build a bit of a toolkit of things that you can use to deploy in different circumstances. And we've spent the last probably 4 or 5 years working out how to do that. We sort of test deployed it in the Lime Grove development we're doing in Gloucester, and now we've got our head around it. We're in the process of acquiring a site with a consent for about 140 units in the Cotswolds at the moment. We'll probably enhance that up to about 160 to 170. We're going to be putting in a combination. There's actually a river running near the site. In fact, it runs under one of the existing buildings. We're going to be putting in screw turbines. We'll be putting in solar panels, batteries. We're going to make that development energy positive. We'll be feeding energy back into the grid, and we'll be powering the whole thing with the sustainability stuff that we're putting into it. That's quite exciting. And okay, we've got an advantage there because there's hydroelectric power, effectively. But I think you just have to look at what you've got where you are and how you can take advantage of it to deliver what you want to deliver. But it's exciting times, and that stuff, you just wouldn't have even heard people talking about it 5 or 10 years ago because it wasn't economically viable to deliver it. It is now.
Do you think we are? In the UK, we tend to build buildings, and they're there forever, basically. Build them, they're there forever. In other countries, there are many other countries where, Japan, many parts of the US, where buildings are built with a life of about 50 years. They expect to knock them down, rebuild them, because all the tech and the way you do it will be completely different. We seem to just, you build them and they're just in there forever. Do you see us moving to that sort of norm where buildings have a finite life and we knock them down and rebuild them with the latest tech?
I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be locked down. There's nothing like a good bit of demolition. Like, we've had a lot of stuff here in the 60s and 70s that's just horrible. I don't know is the answer. I suppose with modular, perhaps you can see us moving in that direction. I think probably what it comes down to is the quality of design. If the design quality is good, people will want to keep it. Some of the developments that the mainstream housing developers are putting up, the Persimmons and Crest Nicholsons of this world, some of it is just horrible. And it should probably be knocked down. But I think it probably depends on the quality of what's being delivered. If it's high quality, I think it'll last through. It'll last a bit longer than the stuff that's being just chucked up and cheap and nasty.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is the mainstream housing developers. They don't adopt any of this stuff until the government forces them to, and yes. So I would have thought probably, as a smaller bespoke private developer, we welcome this new technology and we'll put it into our developments to deliver high quality properties to buyers. But, probably what's caused the government to defer the introduction of that 2023 deadline is pressure from the mainstream house builders. They're just saying we can't do it. They can, they just don't want to, because it's going to make things more expensive for them, and they're all about cost reduction.
Those guys do represent a massive lobby. Listen, we've only got a few minutes left. What I wanted to ask you was to share some of your wisdom in terms of some tips for developers over the next few years. What would you? What are the key things that people should think about, be wary about, pointers that they must get right if they're going to succeed in any property development endeavor over the next couple of years?
Well, I think in and around London, keep a very close eye on modular, because that I think, is something that is going to have a big impact. Outside of London and the home counties, it's more difficult to make that stuff work from a cost point of view, because, as you go out further from London, build costs increase. The cost of producing that stuff in a factory is kind of fixed. And so it works in some parts of the country, but I think over time it'll become more and more relevant. I think do keep a very close eye on the sustainability agenda. Bear in mind that if you're doing a development, you're talking about 1 to 2 years to get the thing finished. And by that time, people's perspectives on this stuff will have changed. That's definitely driving our focus. I think, we talked about London earlier. I'm increasingly of the view that London might be a good place to be putting a bit of money at the moment.
I agree with that.
One of the things that we have achieved this year actually is really interesting. So our project in Kennington is a joint venture with a family office that put about £6 million into that. We've agreed an equity fund with that family office and a leading European private equity fund. That's a £15 million additional equity fund that will be funding this project that I mentioned earlier, the 140 unit scheme. But there's another £10 million in that to fund other things. That's a pretty big milestone for us, because that'll drive projects of values of probably 200 to 300 million. Mm-hmm. This family office also owns some property in prime central London. That's a joint venture with another developer, and that stuff has really just come back to life. And what's interesting about that, so these are sort of 25, 30 million pound properties in Holland Park and Belgravia. What's interesting about that is that prime central London market tends to drive the residential market in London more generally. And so usually it leads the way. Once that starts to recover, you see a more general recovery in the London market.
That is true. That has traditionally been true. And that super prime end has often been driven by foreign buyers. But recently there's been some rule changes which make it far less attractive for foreign buyers to buy up residential homes in London. Do you think that's going to have that much effect? Or do you think these sort of folks have so much money they won't really care? They'll buy the £20 million place in Holland Park anyway?
It's probably more the latter than the former. I don't have that much money, so I don't know. But it's hard to get into the mind of these under the mind of these people. But I do think that COVID is driving demand for properties with more space, and so people, however much money you've got, if your biggest concern in life is probably going to be your health. It's going to be one of your biggest concerns in life. You don't want to end up catching COVID from somebody and then dying as a result. So people are going to want stuff that's got space and where they can get a bit of separation from their neighbours. But I also think people who are investing in that market are probably looking forward a little bit. They are thinking about literally their property as an investment, and so they're probably making those investments and they're being advised with a view that there will be some form of recovery in the London market. And possibly a stronger one than we had thought, because when people were looking at this earlier in the year, they were thinking, is COVID going to go on forever? Will there be a vaccine? The light now is appearing at the end of the tunnel, and that I think it's watch for that swing back.
Yes. No, you're right, and I think if you look at London over the last 40 years or so, it goes through periods of not much happening, and then the growth is always double digit. It's always a few years of double digit. And you only need 3 or 4 years of double digit to more than make up for the few years preceding it where it's done very, very little.
Yeah, and look, here's what else happens. When London is flat, it goes outside London. It goes in ripples. London goes first, it then ripples out, it goes outside London, and then it comes back again. But historically, London has always outperformed. And I think it probably will continue to do so. And it might not seem like it's very flat, but it's flat for London. And so, I think it could be a good time to be buying.
So how do you spend, how are you spending Christmas? Retreating to the country mansion?
This place is let out. I'm actually going to go to the Caribbean.
Oh, wow, brilliant. So no snow for you then?
No, I did think about it, but I thought actually, you know what, trying to get into and out of Europe over New Year might be a bit of a challenge. I didn't want to get stuck in Calais on New Year's Eve, so I thought, no, I think go somewhere else.
Brilliant, brilliant. Listen, Evan, thank you very much for joining us today. I think your insights have been very, very valuable. And I mean, I think all the technologies that are coming, I think for me, I've always, I know they were there, but I think they are really just coming. They're just not just they're there on the horizon. They're not in the distance anymore. They really are just imminent.
Exactly. Look, in the 20 years that I've been doing property development, there has not been a huge change. I mean, the biggest change has probably been the use of timber frame and a bit of ground source heating. Yes. But this stuff is going to start hitting quickly, and it makes it a really exciting time in the property industry. And yes. I think it also, that will create opportunity. It'll create opportunity for entrepreneurs, but it will also result in money being poured into companies that are at the leading edge. You know, in the same way that we've seen tech come into the car industry, we're going to see that come into the property industry.
You know what it is for me, Evan? The thing is, I mean, I'm not a sort of Extinction Rebellion or Green supporter or whatever, but what I see now is that all this stuff has emerged from being at the green end of the spectrum to something that you need to do and is worth doing if you want to enhance the profitability of a particular scheme. I think it's coming into the realm where there's a payback.
It doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not, because there's so much momentum behind it. There's money behind it. There's policy behind it.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not. I mean, the fact is, I think it is overblown by some people, and I think it's underplayed by others. But there's no doubt that you know, this pollution has had an impact on the world that we live in. You might take the view if you live in a cold place, it's a good thing. But you know, I mean, that was slightly tongue in cheek, by the way. But
well, I do think that on a cold day.
If you're thinking about it from an opportunity point of view, it is absolutely something you have to be looking at really closely, because it's going to impact. And if you're not planning for it, it'll come around and hit you in the back of the head and take you by surprise. And in any business, that's what you don't want. But not only that, the opportunity is huge. I mean, look at Tesla's valuation. Elon Musk is now, I think, the richest person in the world, isn't he? I mean, you know, that sort of impact that a company could have on the property industry, it's going to revolutionize things.
Absolutely brilliant. Okay, listen, Evan, thanks very much for joining me as always. Okay. We'll catch up in the new year when we can do so free of restrictions, when you're back all tanned from the Caribbean and all of that.
Love to do that.
Catch you soon, mate, yeah?
Thanks, Ranjan. Cheers. Nice to see you.
Bye for now.
Bye.
So see you guys next time. That's all for now. Keep safe and keep being successful in property. Bye for now.